this is Briar Fox again. This is going to be one of my reflections videos more than anything else. And I'll just have some introspections on just some stuff that's been on my mind lately. So again, if you're not that interested in these, feel free to skip this video. There's not going to be very much pipe stuff talked about in this particular video. So like I said, if you feel like you want to skip this one, go right ahead. But for those of you guys, it's one of the reasons I wore my hat right now. Any of you guys out there that are veterans, that are struggling with some kind of depression, PTSD, other kind of mental health stuff, this might be the one for you. So if you guys are struggling with any of that, stick around, and hopefully I might touch upon one or two things that you guys are dealing with. Once again, I am shooting from inside my van, my soon-to-be adventure camper van. I talked about this very briefly in my last video about how I'm planning on gutting this and turning it into like a whole sleeper camper setup here with everything but a bathroom, basically. But it'll have a sleep area, sort of a lounge slash sitting area, and a little kitchenette of some kind, and of course all the storage and everything that's required for that. Nothing too fancy. I'm a huge fan of Nikki Delventhal. If you guys want to look at some van life stuff, her stuff is amazing. She's got a Mercedes 4x4 Sprinter van, and those, I mean, it's freaking amazing. I'm not gonna go that bougie with it. But anyhow, shooting from in the van again because it is now officially spring here, even though we're only in February. But it is spring out here in the desert Southwest, and with spring comes the winds from hell. It is very common for us to get wind gusts of anywhere from 50 to 80 miles an hour out here during the springtime. Total brownouts, sand and dirt get everywhere. And obviously things like lighting a pipe are not going to be great in this area. So inside the van it is. Got my windows cracked just enough so there's a little bit of circulation in here, and I'm not choking on my own pipe smoke. But once again, I have my Crown Jewels 1/8 bent Dublin. This is the red Sandblast, and I'm smoking the same tin of Scottish mixture, the Davidoff Scottish mixture that I talked about in the last video. I am in fact recording this video immediately after I recorded that last video, which is why I still have that tin in front of me. But I wanted to touch upon some topics today that have kind of been on my mind. As somebody who's dealt with PTSD before, and somebody who deals with chronic mental struggles, and I don't mean crazy stuff, like, I mean, not that, let me rephrase that. You know, somebody who deals with some chronic depression, PTSD, and, you know, a little bit of, you know, who might be even, and am even just a little bit on the spectrum. You know, mental health issues are tough no matter what it is. I know some of you guys have mental health issues that are way harder to deal with than what I have, and to those of you guys, you know, more prayers for you guys. I mean, I couldn't even imagine. Y'all can hear the wind, right? It's buffeting this van. Anyhow, having enlisted in the military, literally, well, I enlisted in high school, and I didn't ship out for boot camp till just after graduation. And then having lived in the military lifestyle for about 8 years or so after graduation, became a military contractor immediately after that. So I was still surrounded by military and the whole military culture, the whole thing. And I was in JROTC in high school. So for me, military culture has been kind of a big part of my life for a long time. And I think in a lot of ways that's kind of shaped who I've become socially, mentally, and emotionally. But it's brought up the question of real friendships, right? Those of you guys that are either still in the military or have served in the military will know, especially Army, because I think you guys are the ones that move around way more than Marines do. It's very easy to make friends wherever you go. You make a lot of friends, and then sadly 2 or 3 years later, sometimes more, sometimes less, you get orders and you have to go someplace else and start all over again. Right? For some of you guys, it's easy. For some of you guys, you have adapted very well to that same life, to that same kind of process and upheaval every couple of years, and you do well with it. Some of you guys are way better adjusted to things like that, and then there are some of us, the other side of those things, where we make these amazing friendships and we forge these amazing bonds, and then in 2 or 3 years you have to say goodbye to these people. For me, that was some of the hardest. Those were some of the hardest experiences that I've ever had to deal with. I've always been kind of an outcast growing up. I was that one kid who got picked on all the time. I was the one kid who was a nerd, who was a band geek, who was a chess club member. I was on a spectrum and I never realized it. Nor did, I think, 90% of the people that I was around back then. I think there were a couple teachers back then who maybe thought, something about that. But this is way before it became common to diagnose people with any kind of autism or any kind of neurodivergence, anything. So I was just a weird kid, which is part of the reason I joined the Marines, believe it or not. But it was very hard for me to build a lot of these relationships after being in the military, and then have to say goodbye after a couple of years. Because I struggled so much in my earlier years, in my youth, to make those friends. Once I kind of managed to have those skills, it was difficult to have to say goodbye. And I think after a few times of doing that, I started to shut people out, basically, where I convinced myself that if I just never got close to them, the pain would be better once they had to leave. Well, it backfired on me. It may not, there are some of you out there that may do that, and that's kind of a, it's a life jacket of sorts, so it's kept you afloat, but I would caution you with everything, because it ended up backfiring for me. What happened is that I learned to shut people out before I even gave them a chance. And in some cases, it still hurt for me to watch them leave. But on top of that, I felt the guilt of never having given them the proper chance, right? But I say that because right now, with the transition that I'm currently in, I've been far enough removed from that lifestyle, that having to PCS every couple of years, which fortunately I never had to do. For me, it was others around me that had that requirement. But now that I'm in this transition, I'm noticing that I'm starting to shut people out in preparation of my move. Good friends that I've had for a long time, I'm starting to build a distance, and this is where I had this big realization. I apologize if you hear sirens in the background. But I had a realization that it wasn't really doing anything. I wasn't really seeing a difference. There was one or two people whom, when I started to kind of pull back and kind of, isolate myself, and I think I did it subconsciously more than consciously. Immediately I would get a call or a text or something saying, "Hey, is everything okay? I haven't heard from you in a couple days. Haven't heard from you in a week, whatever, like what's going on?" And to those friends, I'm eternally grateful, because it shows you're the real ones, right? But by and large, I haven't noticed any reaction from anybody else. Which makes me think of a couple things, is how close are we really to the people that we are around all the time? How well are those friendships established? How deep do those roots go? And I brought this up to my pastor one time. We were having a conversation about this. Let me get this relit. So I brought this up to my pastor and one of my good friends, who I kind of share everything with. And I said, it's kind of sad that I'm not really hearing back from people like I thought I would. I really haven't made the announcement, at least to my local. I've made the announcement here on YouTube, which is very different. But I haven't made the announcement to my local community, my local friends and circles here about me leaving. I've mentioned it to a couple people. And there's been no reaction, which is painful. You would want for your friends, so-called friends, to you would want for them to reach out if they knew that you were going to be going, you were going to be leaving. If they knew they were going to lose you, whether it was permanently or if just over a huge distance. I mean, being out of touch now is a choice. I hate to tell you guys out there, but not being somebody's friend, even through long distance, is completely 100% a choice, because there's so many ways people can keep in touch now. So if you have the excuse of, well, so and so moved away and our friendship just kind of died off after that was 100% your choice. And I'm just going to call it out there like that, because I think it is 100% the truth. But I brought this up and I told this person, hey, it's so weird that, people aren't really, they're not really saying much. They're not really interested if I'm leaving or not. And she said something to me. Yeah, my best friend is a woman. There's a huge story behind that, so I'll tell it later. And she mentioned, well, maybe you should just go and not say anything. Many times absence makes the heart grow fonder. And I believe there's some truth to that. But I also don't think that we should allow ourselves to get to that point where we have to be absent in order for somebody to notice our absence. Or let me rephrase that. I don't believe it should get to the point that we need to be absent in order for somebody to miss our presence. Right? I know that there's a saying that's like, well, I can't miss you unless you go away, which is, I think, is a really cop-out answer. It's a really passive-aggressive answer to people just not want to deal with other people, you know? But yeah, I don't think people should have to leave a geographical area or place in order for somebody to start missing them. But sadly, the truth of it is that there have been times where I have been alone in a city where I, quote unquote, know 100 or more people. You know, between things like close friends, family, close business associates, you know, acquaintances that are close but not quite at friend level yet, maybe. That's kind of a gray area. But even things like church communities, you would think that having that many people on paper that you know, that you are well acquainted with, that you would have an option to be able to reach out to any of them should you need something, right? Whether it's just hey, I need somebody to talk to for 20 minutes, or I need a ride somewhere, or even something bigger. You know, you'll never know. But you would think you would have the option to reach out to somebody. Or you would think that you would have somebody reaching out if maybe you'd been under the radar for a couple of days. Maybe you've been sick. Maybe you've been depressed. Maybe whatever. You would think that out of those 100 or so people, somebody would say, hey, dude, I haven't seen you in a couple of days. Is everything okay? And the point is, I've been alone in a city where I know 100 people. So, what would change when I move? Absolutely nothing. And to me, that's kind of sad. So, what is the point that I'm trying to get at here? Well, I think that point is, number one, yeah, absence might make the heart grow fonder, but why should it? Why does it need to get to that point? I think my rant today, my monologue today, is more aimed at those of us, and I include myself in that camp, unfortunately. But I think it's aimed at those of us who know people, who call certain people friends, but yet we don't really bother ourselves with feeding and watering that relationship. We don't really bother ourselves with checking up on people. You know, it's too easy to send or receive a text and then say, oh, I'll respond later when I'm not so busy or whatever. And then a day goes by, a couple days go by, and you haven't responded. And like, oh, I need to respond to that. And then, or maybe you just forgot about it. And then before you know it, weeks go by, months have gone by. Sadly, I've been in a situation where, you know, years have gone by. And sadly, some of those have been my family members. I went to a wedding one time. This was many years ago now. But I went to a wedding. I'm not going to give any names, so I'm not going to, your identities are secure, people, if you're watching this. But it was one of my cousin's weddings. Like I said, this is maybe about 12, 13 years ago. And I had fallen out of touch with a lot of my family around this time. I've always had a hard time, just in general. I married very young. I started having kids very, very young, and not that I regret any of that, but it put me in a situation where I've always had to really, really struggle to stay afloat. So I was always working. And then, of course, when my late wife, foreshadowing, got sick, I had to dedicate a lot of my time and energy to taking care of her, dealing with that whole situation. So naturally, I fell out of touch with a lot of people. Well, I went to this wedding, saw a bunch of my other cousins, have a very large extended family, and, yeah, there's a lot of, like bullshitting around and horsing around and this and that, and, where everybody's kind of talking shit and stuff. Typical friendly cousin banter, But one of them said something that, to this day, I don't know if he meant it seriously or he was just being snarky for the sake of being snarky. All my cousins are like that. Honestly, they would have all made great Marines because they treat each other like Marines, right? No better way to say I love you than telling somebody to F off or calling somebody ugly or whatever. So those are my cousins. And one of them said to me, "Hey, dude, I haven't seen you in a while." And I said, "Yeah, I know." I said, I'm sorry, I haven't seen you in a while too. It's good to finally catch up. And he says to me, "Well, you have my number, dude. Like, you have my number." And I so badly wanted to say to them at that time, but I didn't. But now I think I should if it comes up again. He said, "Well, you have my number." And I wanted to say, you have mine too. It's a two-way street. Why do I have to be the one to reach out? If you think of me, if you were thinking of me at some point, you should have called me. Fast forward 15 years. It's been 15 years since I lost my wife. Of course, during the wedding, sadly, I ended up walking out of that wedding because it was just too much for me. And I apologize to those of you that saw me do that, but now you know why. But I was still very much in the middle of my grieving process. Left the wedding early, didn't say goodbye to anybody, just kind of slinked out. I didn't hear back from anybody at all. Not one person called me back and said, "Hey, are you okay? What's going on? Hey, why did you leave? Hey," I think I heard back from one of my aunts, and it wasn't a concern like, "Hey, are you okay? Why did you leave?" It was a, "How rude, why did you leave?" before saying goodbye to anybody else. So anyway, this rant is more geared towards those of you who are part of any kind of relationship dynamic. And by relationship, I mean familial, friendships. In fact, I kind of mean everything but romantic, because that's kind of in its own little category, right? And so if you find yourself in a situation where you're friends with somebody, you know that you haven't heard from them, or you know that you haven't fed and watered that relationship, maybe reach out. Maybe reach out and see what's going on. Be the bigger person and see why you haven't heard from this person back. Or why you haven't heard back from this person, rather. I don't understand why we all have to wait to be the ones to be reached out to, instead of being the ones doing the reaching out. And I tie this back in full circle with the whole military community, because there's a lot of us out here that have kind of learned to keep people at a distance because it's a defense mechanism, Like I said, I had more than a handful of times where I had made the best friend in the world that I had had up to that point, only to turn around and have to say goodbye to them 2 years later. Now, yes, I've kept in touch with a lot of them over the years, but it's very different when I'm living in West Texas and somebody's living in Florida, somebody's living in Georgia, somebody's living in Missouri, you know, somebody's living in Kentucky, Washington State, something like that. It's very different. And obviously the relationship isn't the same, but it makes it kind of even sadder that I hear back from people who are 1,000 miles away saying, hey, dude, I noticed that you posted something online that was a little concerning, or hey, I noticed that you've been kind of sad lately, or that you've been posting sad stuff, or that you know, a lot of them follow me on Spotify, so they're like, hey, you've been listening to a lot of sad music, like, what's up? These are the people that are hundreds or even 1,000 miles away. But any of my local people, they really couldn't care less. And it's just, it's one of those things that makes you want to reflect on everything, right? And makes you really consider things. So I'm not saying this just to, you know, bitch and complain and like, woe is me kind of thing. I'm saying this as a reflection of, I carry some of that weight myself of being the one that's not been there when I should have been there. So I encourage you all to reach out to those of you, or reach out to those friends of yours that maybe have a hard time reaching out themselves, you know, especially if they're military, veterans, first responders, somebody who you know that maybe has had some kind of traumatic event in their past. Widowers, I'm all of those, you know. Well, I'm a veteran and a widower. You know, I've dealt with my share of PTSD and stuff. And just look out for each other is what I'm saying. Oh my gosh, this wind. But look out for each other. Reach out to somebody you haven't heard from in a while. And be a friend. Really is kind of what I'm getting at here with this rant for today's video. It's just be a friend. I've tried not to get religious on these posts, on these videos, but I will say this: it's who Christ calls us to be. You know, it's to look out, to edify others, to carry each other's burdens, and to be encouraging and edifying to anyone that we come across, especially to those of us that we consider family or that are close to us. Maybe some of us need to make some phone calls tonight. You know, don't expect that one introvert friend of yours, that one veteran who's always quiet, who's always reserved. Don't expect them to be the ones to reach out, because we can't. Sometimes we just cannot. It's been that much of an ingrained thought process in our heads to not want to or be able to reach out. So if you know somebody like that, please reach out and make sure that they're doing okay. And to those of you who might be in a situation where you are feeling alone, to where you are, you know, going through it and don't really have anybody to talk to, call somebody. Find a counseling center in your town. Find a church group in your town. Or if it's really, really bad, guys, I'm gonna link this in the description below, but you know, call the national helpline. It could mean the difference between seeing tomorrow and not for some of us, some of you guys. But above all, if nothing else, if none of those other things seem to be an option for you, it costs you nothing. And you first of all, it doesn't cost you anything. It's not any kind of shame. You can do it in the privacy of your own home or bedroom or whatever. But if nothing else, take a couple minutes to get on your knees and just cry out to Jesus. I could say a lot more about that right now, but I'm not. But I can safely tell you guys that if I hadn't done that at some point in my life, I would not be here right now. Because if nobody else will, he will listen. Might not seem like it at the moment, but he will listen. Anyway, guys, I've gone on for a little bit too long, longer than I wanted to. My pipe's gone out. Time to either reload or get to my next destination. And that's it. I mean, that's really all I wanted to mention right now and talk about. And if nothing else, reach out to me here. There's links on my YouTube About page on how to get a hold of me if you need to. And if it's not up there right now, they will be by the time I upload this video. So I will make that promise, is that I will be available if nobody else is available to you guys. All right. But with that, be kind to each other, lift each other up, and above everything else, happy piping. Until next time.